belonged to Yugoslavia, owes billions and billions and billions of never-ending debt to the IMF. So using economic power, which is a part of warfare, economics is the most important part of warfare, in fact. You bring every country under your thumb, technically your ownership. And the countries that are on the sidelines of war, like Canada, we're still part of it because we're borrowing from the same private banks. And we're highly indebted to them with compound interest, which is designed so that you can never get out of it. So that's basically what we're living through today. The end of sovereignty, the destruction of all cultures that previously existed. Tony Blair's right-hand man came out and said that in the British major media. He said that he was told to open the floodgates to the whole of the UK in order to destroy forever the last vestige of British culture so that it can never reappear in any form whatsoever. And that was mainstream, and nobody commented on it. Quite surprising.
Hi, it's interesting what you say about Yugoslavia, because I've driven through Serbia and Croatia on a number of occasions, and you see the infrastructure that's been built there since the war, obviously on borrowed money. I mean, the motorways and all the new housing that's been built, all the rest of it. I mean, it's all, high-tech, modern. I mean, they have better roads there than they have in Britain. And
the problem over there too is that they're not even allowed to have their own central bank, a private bank of their own. They're not even allowed that. They pay rent for everything, and it's all foreigners who own their land that they sit on, that the houses are built on, or they pay rent to. All the companies that are left are foreign owned, because they put you up on the auction block, and of course they already have their pre-designed buyers, selected buyers, because there's no such thing as free competition in this system. And as I say, the World Bank even put that out before they started bombing those countries in the first place. They knew the value of each mine, they knew the value of the land, they knew what they wanted to build after they blew down millions of homes, and who would own them. They published their findings before it all happened.
Yeah, well, I mean, all the petrol stations in Serbia are all Russian owned. So they don't seem to own anything. But going back to the UK and Ireland, I suppose we'll start there. You commented a while ago on your own broadcast that Ireland was going to be taken down completely, and but somebody's commented here that you maybe suggested that that idea had been changed. But what's your feelings on what's going to happen to Ireland in the future?
Well, Ireland definitely has to be taken down, because this is a very old organization we're talking about. And their plan is very old. They say in the 1800s especially, lots was published on this. But you find the top economists that are still quoted today from that period, like John Stuart Mill and then his son of the same name, they both said that certain cultures would never fit in with a new order of things, because they're so they don't like giving up rights and freedoms. And they had the Scots listed as one, they had the Irish as a second one, they had the American Indian down because he would not adapt into an economic system where you work from 8 to 5 for a paycheck. And another one too was the blacks in Africa. This is, well, those who can mimic, these are the words they used, those who can mimic the white man and copy his structure will be allowed to come through into the new system. The rest of them, they said, cannot come through, or they'll destroy the new system. So this is again Darwinian as well. Darwin said a similar thing. He said those inferior types will bring down the superior types if we bring in a new system. So we're all basically being slated for either breeding out of existence, which is an old Norman trick, by the way, if you go into your history books, or simply lots of folk will die off without getting married at all, because there's a destruction of marriage. Folk can get lots of sex, but they're having no children. And so that was the other way too. H.G. Wells also wrote a book called The Modern Utopia, where he projected the system they would bring in after they had sterilized all the inferior types. He says, we weren't so bad as to kill them all at once. He says, we just sterilized them so eventually they died out. And when we talk about these things, it sounds crazy to the folk who listen to the mainstream. You've got to understand that the mainstream is owned by this group. Your whole reality, in fact, your whole life long, is owned by this group. In fact, this group even publishes all your history books in every country for educational purposes, right up through university. And even Winston Churchill brought that topic up when he found out during World War II that this group had been highly manipulative in bringing about World War II. He brought it up in the House of Commons because he wasn't in the loop on that particular level at that time. And he said it's astonishing to know that a small group of people based here, he says in London, have been manufacturing the British history at that time, middle of the war, manufacturing that from at least the late 1800s, and giving us false history as to the reasons why things happen, and teaching our children from all schools, right up through university, basically a false history of what actions have happened in history, why they happened, and so on. And so he was really furious at it. He said they were so secretive in his time that they didn't even use the name that it went under, which was at the Royal Institute for International Affairs. That's the later name they adopted. Before that, it was called the Milner Group. The junior workers that were put into politics and bureaucracy was simply called the Kindergarten, and that's in the book Tragedy and Hope, and the Anglo-American Establishment by Professor Carroll Quigley, who again was the historian for this group. Yeah.
Alan, I wonder if I could just ask you a question on. We talked a little bit about Ireland there. How do you see the UK at the moment? What do you think's unfolding here?
Well, the UK has to go into a very primitive lifestyle. When they're talking austerity, they're talking about poverty for most people. What I should add to this too, as Professor Quigley said, that the system they're bringing in is a new feudal system. And I think we all know what feudalism is. Where your betters, the better types, the ones who come out of special wombs basically, will be the ones who will guide you from birth to death. Right through the system, if they need you, that is. And Quigley also said that the CEOs of major international corporations will be the new feudal overlords. Well, we see chunks of land being sold off under the guise of business and commerce in Britain and elsewhere to major international corporations. And eventually, like Karl Marx said, the nation state will wither away. He didn't add why he knew and how he knew it would wither away. Well, we're going to find out, because they're selling off big chunks of what was sovereign territory to foreign. You can't even call them. They're not people. They're not nations. They're entities. They're fictional entities called international corporations.
Yeah.
And you've got to understand too that you've had a war on your culture that was tried and failed, especially in Britain, in the 1920s. The 1920s was called the Roaring Twenties. They tried prohibition. They had their own versions in Britain, where you had to go to the next town to get a drink if you wanted to. So that was intended to make the booze cans, the legal places, very exciting to youngsters, which it did. And they brought the miniskirt in at the time. They gave them the Charleston, and they told them to go at it, free sex, free love. And something that, by the way, H.G. Wells was told to write about and promote from the late 1800s, believe it or not, in his books. And so they brought it in the 1920s, but the fallout was too much. The venereal disease went rampant. There was no penicillin. Unwanted pregnancies everywhere. That's when they opened up the massive orphanages across the U.S. and Britain and elsewhere, the Boys Town type places. And so they couldn't cope with the fallout. So they went back to the drawing board. And in the 1960s, they brought it back more perfected. They gave them the pill at the same time. We had antibiotics for some of the venereal diseases. We were given abortions, free abortions, to take care of any problems. The state will take care of any problems for you. Then the destruction of the family unit was all part of that. It was very, very successful. Decimated the population of Britain. And even in the official reports, as they shout about overpopulation, you'll see that Britain's been plummeting from their official census, even at the United Nations, since about the 1950s onwards. We've been plummeting until the reason they give now for mass immigration, although it's not really for that, it's for 2 or 3 purposes. The reason they give is we need the population, younger people to come in, and because none of the older ones have had any children. Well, they weren't having children because they were told to have free love and not to have children for years and years and years, male and female. Just have fun, play like children till you're 80 and die, And that's what they were doing. So now this is the excuse for massive population, but really it's part of the total, as I say, the end of all culture that will happen as all these people move in and take over, and you're in the minority. As I say, they said they've got to destroy these cultures forever. And that was the assistant to Tony Blair who said that.
Yeah. Do you think we can do something about it?
I'll tell you, we're so late on this that it would take something really extraordinary and powerful to change this. We've got to understand, you've never had democracy. Democracy is a front, in fact, for this very group. It never ends up being what you think it is. Democracy, in reality, that we see is totalitarianism by bureaucracy. That's what it is. And international corporations hand in glove with them. The saddest thing is that Bertrand Russell, who also worked for the same group, who was given lots of money by Royal Charter, by the way, to do things that you would string up adults today for doing, he had a special school set up to find ways of promoting pre-pubertal sex in children in the 1920s by encouraging them to have that at school, and all kinds of sex as well. And he says the idea was to if they can have promiscuity before puberty comes in, and we hyperactivate them to think about sex all the time by constant repetition. He said that these children will never bond with a partner for their whole lives and probably never have a child. That was their goal. But what we're looking at today is the end product, the disaster of it all. It works so well. And what you need now is more than just talking. What I do know, when I look at the reality of the wars that are ongoing across the Middle East, for instance, that was ongoing, but when Clinton was in, and then Bush was in, and then the present one is in, it doesn't matter the front man. It's the same agenda with the same list of countries that must be taken out, and then the big banking boys move in and take over all the resources. We're seeing one after another our whole lives long go under in this fashion. These guys are not going to give up. They're using, as I say, NATO like a private army for thievery and robbery, and depopulation big time of their enemies. They're not going to give up because you ask them. They won't do it. It's not going to happen. I've watched an internal army built up of so-called policemen in some countries that are not like the policemen I used to know. You don't walk up to the present policeman and ask him for the time. He might shoot you, So they built up internal armies over the last 25, 30 years in preparation for what's to come, because we're dealing with long-term planning here. Just like businesses too, especially international businesses, they do their long-term investments, takeovers and all. They are all planned for the next 50, 75 years. Well, these guys are the same boys who plan our futures. And they will not just walk away because we tell them that they're not nice people and this is not democratic. It's not going to happen. They know they're going to bring down the final crashes. That's to get us to our knees. They've told us they're going to bring in food rationing across the world. You've got to go into the United Nations. There's a front group for the main group that's based in London. That's what all the United Nations is. And go into their different departments. Look into the Department for Agriculture, Food and Agriculture. was a woman at the time who was the CEO of that department.